I never thought my name would be turned into a weapon. But there it was, printed in black ink on an official document, a neat and perfect signature that looked exactly like mine. My name, my rank, my honor. It was attached to a fraudulent defense contract worth millions, and that single forged page carried the weight of betrayal heavier than any combat gear I'd ever strapped to my shoulders. The truth was simple and brutal. While that signature claimed I was in Virginia signing away my authority, I was thousands of miles away, leading a covert reconnaissance mission off the coast of Somalia. I was under the burning sun, listening to the hum of engines and the radio chatter of men who trusted me with their lives. I was nowhere near American soil. So how did my name, my handwriting, my very identity end up on that page? Who slipped it into a pile of classified files as if I had willingly traded honor for money? The deeper question was the one that hollowed me out from the inside. Why did the trail of that forgery lead straight back to the people who were supposed to love me, the family whose blood runs in my veins? That was the question I couldn't ignore, the wound that bled even when no one else could see it. Before I take you into this story, a story about what happens when loyalty collides with greed, when truth becomes a battlefield, and when a woman has no choice but to fight for her own name, I need to pause for one moment. If you're here listening, if you find yourself drawn to tales of resilience, justice, and the kind of battles that don't always happen on foreign soil but inside the walls of our own homes, then please take a second. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel. Turn on the notifications so you can join us for every story we share. Your support doesn't just grow a community, it keeps these stories alive, because somewhere out there another veteran, another daughter, another fighter needs to hear that they are not alone. Now let me pull you back into the thread of this story. To understand how one signature could become a bullet aimed at my honor, we have to return to a day that was supposed to be filled with joy, a day wrapped in sunshine and celebration. The day my younger brother, Daniel Morgan, graduated from Georgetown University. I remember the May air in Washington, D.C., sweet with the smell of newly cut grass, the lawns immaculate as if trimmed by invisible hands. The sky was postcard perfect, the kind of blue politicians put on campaign posters to make you believe in hope. Guests drifted across the green like figures in a painting, mothers in summer dresses, fathers in tailored suits, champagne flutes catching the light like liquid gold. Laughter rose above the string quartet playing under a white tent, a soundtrack of easy privilege. And me, I was the shadow no one wanted in the frame. I stood beneath an old oak tree at the edge of the celebration, the bark rough against my back, a glass of sparkling water in my hand as though it could steady me. I wore black trousers and a simple blouse, the kind of outfit you put together when you want to look presentable but not memorable. Against the sea of designer dresses and sharp suits, I might as well have been invisible. Or worse, I was visible enough to be judged, yet not enough to be welcomed. My mother floated past me like she always did, her eyes sliding over me with that familiar glaze of disappointment. She didn't stop. She didn't have to. Her words sliced into me without breaking her social smile. "Claire," she whispered through clenched teeth, "for God's sake, you couldn't have worn something more fitting. You look like a secret we're trying to hide." She drifted away before I could answer, leaving me gripping my glass so tightly my knuckles went white. I had faced down armed men, storms at sea, nights so black you forgot the world had color. But nothing left me as breathless as being treated like a blemish on the Morgan family portrait. So I did what the military had taught me. Inhale, exhale, focus, steady yourself when the world tilts. Then came my father's entrance. Richard Morgan didn't walk, He commanded the ground the way a shark cuts through water. He moved among senators and investors with the ease of a man who believed the world belonged to him. And perhaps it did, at least for now. His hand clapped Daniel's shoulder, his smile dazzling, his voice booming with pride. Daniel, his golden boy, the investment that always paid dividends. "This is my son, Daniel Morgan," my father announced to the crowd as if he were unveiling a new company, not celebrating a human life. Graduating with honors, the future of international finance, the very best return this family could have hoped for. Applause, champagne glasses raised, a father glowing with pride. And then his eyes found me. The warmth vanished. His expression cooled to ice, his smile turning into a sharp blade. He gestured vaguely in my direction, his words slicing me in front of 100 witnesses. "And that," he said with a shrug, "is Claire, 12 years in the Air Force, a failed investment, a loss we've had to write off." Laughter followed, hesitant, awkward, but still laughter, and every note of it felt like a fist slamming into my chest. I didn't flinch. I couldn't. Years of training held my face in a mask, my body steady even as my insides twisted. I stared at the distant spire of Healy Hall, focusing the way a sniper does when the world is spinning out of control. But then something broke through the polite laughter, the clinking glasses, the shallow admiration. A sound, a roar. At first it was a low hum like distant thunder, then louder until the entire lawn shuddered beneath it. Heads turned upward. A helicopter, a gray Air Force bird descending from the sky, its rotors ripping through the perfect spring day. Champagne flutes toppled, hats flew, guests screamed as the downdraft sent papers and petals into a frenzy. It was chaos, raw and undeniable. The helicopter touched down right there on the Georgetown lawn. The side door slid open and soldiers in full gear spilled out, weapons held low but presence undeniable. And then, through the storm of wind and gasps, one figure strode straight toward me. Colonel Harris, my old mentor. His boots cut across the grass, his eyes locked on mine. He stopped in front of me, snapped a salute sharp enough to cut glass, and spoke the words that froze everyone in their tracks. "Major Morgan," he said, loud and clear. "We need you." The world fell silent. My father's jaw dropped. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel's smile faltered. Guests stared wide-eyed, their laughter dying on their lips. Colonel Harris handed an envelope to the dean, then leaned close enough for only me to hear. His voice was low, urgent, chilling. "Claire," he whispered, "your name is on a contract we never received. It's bad, and it's tied to your father's firm." I nodded once. The soldier in me rose, steady and unyielding. I turned my back on my family and walked toward the waiting helicopter, my steps even, my resolve unshaken. I didn't glance back, not at my father's ashen face, not at my mother's horror, not at Daniel's confusion. I was leaving their world behind. As the helicopter lifted, Washington shrinking beneath us, one truth crystallized inside me. The battle was no longer on foreign soil. It was here, in my own bloodline, and the war for my name had just begun. The helicopter's roar still echoed in my bones long after we lifted from the Georgetown lawn. But before that moment, before the dust and chaos, before Colonel Harris placed that envelope in my hand, there had been laughter, applause, and champagne. There had been a day painted in gold for someone else, a day I was never meant to belong to. The morning of Daniel's graduation arrived with all the ceremony of a coronation. The Morgans knew how to put on a show. My father, Richard Morgan, wasn't just attending his son's graduation. He was hosting an event, curating an audience, turning a family milestone into a stockholder presentation. He believed in optics the way priests believe in scripture. Nothing mattered more than the image of success, and in his mind, Daniel was the masterpiece, the proof that the Morgan legacy was secure. I walked across the pristine Georgetown campus, my heels tapping against the cobblestone like an unwelcome metronome. Every corner seemed alive with banners, bouquets, and camera flashes. Parents swarmed the green, hugging children who wore gowns and caps, their tassels swinging like pendulums of pride. You could smell the money in the air, expensive perfume, polished leather, cigars waiting to be lit after speeches. And then there was me, the daughter who came home in boots, not in tailored shoes, the veteran whose medals were tucked away in a drawer instead of displayed in glass cases, the woman who had seen comrades die under foreign skies, yet could not win the approval of the man who sired her. Tell me, have you ever stood in a place where everyone else seems to glow while you feel like a shadow no one wants to claim? That was me on that lawn. Maybe you felt that too, at a wedding where you were the forgotten sibling, at a family dinner where your chair seemed smaller than the rest. That's the sting I carried into that day. Daniel stood at the center of it all, his cap tilted just right, his smile polished for photographs. He had inherited my father's broad shoulders, my mother's easy charm, and all the advantages money could buy. Daniel wasn't just graduating, he was ascending, and everyone could see it. He was the kind of man people described with words like promising, brilliant, destined. My father fed on those words. He banked them like currency. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Morgan's voice carried across the crowd with the authority of a man used to commanding boardrooms. He had the presence of a general, though the only wars he fought were in the stock exchange. Today is not just a celebration of my son's academic achievement. It is a celebration of the future. Daniel Morgan represents the next chapter of our family's story, a story of vision, resilience, and excellence. Applause rose like a wave, glasses clinked, smiles widened. And what a return on investment he has been, my father continued, his hand resting proudly on Daniel's shoulder. Georgetown honors, international finance offers lining up, a career brighter than we could have imagined. This is what it means to be a Morgan. I stood in the back, watching his words etch themselves into the air like carvings on stone. My jaw tightened, but my face remained neutral. Years in uniform had trained me not to flinch, not to reveal what churned inside. But inside it was a storm, and then came the part that stripped me bare. My father turned his gaze toward me. His smile thinned into something colder, sharper, as though he'd been waiting for the moment to twist the knife. And of course, we have our daughter, Claire. He gestured in my direction with the casual indifference of a man pointing out an old car rusting in the driveway. 12 years in the Air Force. A different path, you could say. Not exactly the return one might hope for, but every family has its anomalies. The crowd chuckled, some politely, some nervously, laughter nonetheless. My chest burned as though the metals I had once worn had turned molten inside me. He had just reduced over a decade of my life, 12 years of missions, sacrifices, brothers and sisters lost, to a failed investment, an anomaly, a mistake. What would you have done if you were me? Would you have shouted back, thrown your glass at his feet, told the truth in front of everyone? Or would you have stood there, silent, letting the humiliation sink like a knife so deep it nearly touches your spine? I'll tell you what I did. I stood straighter. I held my head higher. Because the battlefield had taught me one lesson above all: never let the enemy see you bleed. But inside, oh God, inside I was bleeding. My mother drifted to my side, her perfume sharp and suffocating. "Don't make a scene," as she hissed without moving her lips, her smile still plastered on for the cameras. "This is Daniel's day. Don't ruin it." Then she floated away, leaving me nailed to the ground with her words. It was always Daniel's day. It had been Daniel's day since the moment he was born. Mine was a footnote. Mine was 12 years erased with a shrug. I glanced at Daniel then. Did he see me? Did he hear the way our father cut me down in front of strangers? His smile faltered for a heartbeat. His eyes flicked toward me with something like guilt, or maybe pity. Then he turned back to the crowd, basking once again in their applause. Do you know what pity feels like from someone who has everything you've been denied? It feels like salt poured on an open wound. I stepped back, retreating into the shade of the oak tree, watching as photographers snapped picture after picture of the Morgans, a portrait of success. Except one piece didn't fit. Me. I was the jagged edge that didn't belong in their perfect frame. Here's a question for you. When your own blood writes you off, where do you find your worth? Is it in the medals hidden away, the comrades who still call you sister, the memories of nights you barely survived? Or is it in the silence, the refusal to let them see how much they've broken you? That day I chose silence. I chose steel. I chose to hold my ground even as the earth crumbled beneath me. And then, well, you know what came next. The hum, the roar, the storm in the sky that no one expected, the helicopter that shattered the celebration and ripped the mask off the Morgan family. But before we get there, before the world saw me through a different lens, let me take you deeper into the cracks that had been forming for years. Because betrayals like these don't start with one forged signature. They start in childhood, in words whispered at dinner tables, in the way one child is lifted high while another is left behind. And that is where my story truly begins. When the helicopter blades finally slowed, the air was thick with silence. The lawn behind us looked like a crime scene of champagne flutes and scattered programs, the faces of my family frozen in disbelief. But inside the cabin, away from their eyes, I was no longer just the daughter they dismissed. I was a soldier being called back to duty, and duty never waits. Colonel Harris sat across from me, his expression grave, the lines on his face carved deeper than I remembered. He had aged since I last saw him, but his eyes still held that sharp, unyielding clarity, the kind that could see through lies and smoke and shadows. He handed me a sealed folder, the kind stamped with warnings in bold red letters. Classified, eyes only, unauthorized access punishable by federal law. "Read," he said simply. His voice was steady, but his jaw was clenched tight. I opened the folder, my hands steady though my heart drummed against my ribs. Inside were pages of contracts, procurement orders, financial statements. But what caught my eye, the dagger that cut through me, was a signature at the bottom of a defense agreement worth millions. My name, my handwriting, my authority. But it wasn't me. Do you know what it feels like to see your own name used as a weapon against you? To see your honor stolen and stamped onto something filthy? It's like finding your face on a wanted poster for a crime you didn't commit. It's a betrayal so deep it makes your bones ache. I stared at the page, willing the letters to shift, to morph into something else. But they didn't. They stayed there, black ink etched onto white paper, mocking me. "I wasn't even in the country," I whispered. This is impossible." Harris leaned forward, his voice low enough that the crew couldn't hear. "I know where you were, Claire. I know the mission. I know you couldn't have signed this. That's why we came straight to you. Whoever forged this didn't just risk their career, they risked national security." And the trail, he hesitated, his eyes locking on mine, searching for strength before delivering the blow. "The trail leads back to your father's firm." For a moment, the roar of the rotors came back in my ears, even though the blades were still. It drowned out everything else. My father, Richard Morgan, his empire, his hands on every deal, every connection, every dollar that flowed through the veins of Wall Street. Could it really be him? My throat tightened. "Are you saying my father forged my name?" "I'm saying," Harris replied carefully, "that the documents were routed through Morgan Global Holdings. Someone in his orbit had access. Someone who knew enough about you to replicate your signature." It felt like the air had been sucked out of the cabin. I couldn't breathe. I pressed my palms to my knees, grounding myself the way I had on missions when panic threatened to take over. Maybe you know that feeling. That moment when the truth you've always feared suddenly stares you in the face. Have you ever suspected someone you love might betray you, but pushed it down, convinced yourself you were wrong, only to find the evidence staring back at you? That's where I was, sitting in that helicopter, holding the proof in my hands. My mind raced. I thought of childhood dinners where my father lectured us about investments and returns, always measuring worth in terms of profit. I thought of how he called Daniel his greatest achievement and me a write-off. What if to him I was nothing more than a signature to be used, a name to be traded? I clenched the folder until my knuckles went white. What do you need from me? Harris didn't hesitate. The truth, your cooperation, and the courage to face what we might uncover. I almost laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. Courage, as if I hadn't spent 12 years carrying it like a shield. But this was different. Out there in the desert or on the sea, the enemy wore a uniform, carried a weapon. You knew where the fire was coming from, but here, the enemy might sit across from you at a dinner table, raising a glass in your honor while stabbing you in the back. Claire, Harris said, his voice gentler now, this won't be easy, but you've faced worse. And I believe you're the only one who can bring this into the light. I closed the folder, my decision solidifying like steel cooling into form. Then we bring it into the light. The helicopter banked toward Andrews Air Force Base, the city shrinking beneath us, the Capitol dome gleaming like a false promise. Later that night, in the quiet of a briefing room, I spread the documents across a long wooden table. Harris stood beside me, pointing out the trail of signatures, authorizations, and approvals. Each one linked back in some way to Morgan Global. Well, look here, he said, tapping a date. This authorization supposedly signed by you was processed while you were off the coast of Somalia. I traced the date with my finger, remembering the mission vividly. The smell of salt, the sound of engines, the moment we intercepted a smuggler's vessel carrying weapons. I had been there, commanding my team, ensuring no one died that day. And yet here on paper, I was signing a multi-million-dollar deal stateside. The fury rose in me like fire catching on dry grass. They thought I'd never see this. They thought I'd be too far away, too buried in classified work to notice. Harris nodded. That's exactly why they used you, because your missions were black ops, because you couldn't publicly dispute being in two places at once. They counted on your silence. Silence, my father's favorite weapon. I sat back, staring at the papers, the walls, the years of my life that suddenly looked different in this new light. How long had I been nothing more than a pawn in their game? Tell me, if someone used your name, your honor, as currency, how far would you go to take it back? Would you confront them at the risk of shattering your family? Would you bury it to keep the peace? Or would you do what I was about to do, dig until the truth had no place left to hide? Because for me, there was no choice. I had survived too much, fought too hard to let them erase me with a pen. That night, alone in the barracks room Harris had arranged, I stared at the ceiling, the hum of the bass around me. My thoughts circled like predators. My father's voice echoed in my head. Not exactly the return one might hope for. Was this what he meant? That even my name, my service, could be traded, sold, used as leverage? I thought of Daniel. Did he know? Was he complicit or just another piece in Richard Morgan's empire? And my mother, did she look away as she always had, pretending not to see the wreckage her silence allowed? I turned onto my side, clutching the folder as though it were a weapon. Maybe it was. The next morning, Harris called me back to the briefing room. A new stack of documents waited, thicker than before. We pulled more files overnight, he said. It's worse than we thought. Worse. That word lingered in the air, heavy as lead. Page after page revealed the same pattern, contracts routed through shell companies, approvals bearing my signature, and profit streams flowing back to accounts tied to Morgan Global. It wasn't just one forgery. It was systematic. It was deliberate. And the number at the bottom of the totals, hundreds of millions. I closed my eyes, my pulse thundering in my ears. "This isn't just fraud," I said. "It's treason." Harris's silence was answer enough. "I want to ask you something. If you discovered the people you trusted most were capable of something this dark, would you still call them family? Or would you finally admit the truth, that sometimes blood ties are nothing but chains meant to bind you to their sins?" For me, the answer came sharp and clear. Family may have given me a name, but honor gave me a life. And I would fight for that life, even if it meant burning bridges that could never be rebuilt. And so, in that sterile briefing room with the hum of fluorescent lights, I made a vow to myself, to the comrades I'd lost, to the truth itself. I would uncover every lie. I would drag every shadow into the light, and if my father's empire stood in the way, then so be it. Empires fall, but honor, that is eternal. That night, after Harris left me with the mountain of documents and the silence of the briefing room, I found myself staring into the dark. Sleep wouldn't come. It rarely did, but this time the reason was different. It wasn't the echoes of combat or the faces of the fallen. It was something older, something buried deeper. The weight of betrayal had unlocked a door in my mind, and behind it was the childhood I had spent a lifetime trying to forget. I lay back on the narrow cot, staring at the ceiling, and suddenly I was 10 years old again, sitting at the long mahogany dinner table in my parents' house. The chandelier glittered above us, its light fractured across crystal glasses and silver forks. Everything gleamed except me. Daniel was 7 then, still small enough that his feet didn't touch the floor, but already he was the star of every conversation. "Our Daniel is gifted," my father would say, his voice brimming with pride. "Sharp as a tack, he'll be a leader one day." My mother would smile, nod, and smooth Daniel's hair while he beamed at the praise. And me, I was just there, present but not celebrated. I was the quiet one, the one who didn't fit into their vision of perfection. When I brought home straight A's, my father barely glanced at the report card. "Expected," he said flatly, as though achievement meant nothing unless it could be leveraged into profit. Tell me, have you ever sat at a table full of people and felt invisible? Have you ever listened as your sibling was showered with praise while your own accomplishments vanished like smoke? That was my childhood, night after night, year after year. One memory, sharper than the rest, has haunted me all my life. I was 16, standing in the foyer with an acceptance letter in my hand. It was from the Air Force Academy. I had worked for it relentlessly, pushing through every obstacle, every doubt. It was my dream, my chance to prove that my worth wasn't tied to stocks or boardrooms, but to something greater. I remember the way my heart pounded as I handed the letter to my father. I thought just for a second that he would look at me with pride, that maybe, finally, I would matter. He unfolded the letter, read it slowly, then let out a short, humorless laugh. "A Morgan," he said, his eyes cutting into me, "doesn't need to wear a uniform to prove value. Soldiers are tools. We are the ones who own the battlefield, not fight on it. You want to serve. Serve your family's name, not strangers who won't remember you when you're gone." Those words lodged inside me like shrapnel. A Morgan doesn't need to wear a uniform. He said it with contempt, as if my dream was an embarrassment, a betrayal of the empire he was building. That night I cried into my pillow, silently, so no one would hear. But even then, I knew what I would do. I would prove him wrong. Do you know that fire, that stubborn spark that lights when someone tells you you're not enough? Maybe you felt it too, the urge to rise, not just in spite of them, but because of them. To carve your worth into the world so deep that no one can erase it. That was the fire that carried me into the academy, through basic training, through deployments that nearly broke me. But the fire has a cost. Because every time I came home, medals in hand, stories I could never tell burning on my tongue, he looked at me the same way he had when I was 16. Dismissive. disappointed, a waste of potential. He called me once, after I turned down an internship at his firm to re-enlist. "You've shackled yourself to a life that doesn't pay dividends." Dividends. That was his word for love. I think part of me always knew that my father saw me as a failed investment. But to see it so clearly, to watch him humiliate me in front of strangers at Daniel's graduation, and then to discover my name twisted into a weapon for his gain, it was more than betrayal. It was prophecy fulfilled. He had been telling me all along that I didn't matter, and now he had found a way to use me even in my insignificance. Lying there on the cot, I let the memories wash over me, the missed birthdays because he was too busy closing deals, the way my mother would silence me at parties, whispering, "Don't embarrass us, Claire." The constant comparison to Daniel, who was everything I wasn't, the golden boy, the investment that always grew. But here's the truth no one talks about. When you grow up in the shadow of favoritism, you learn to fight battles long before you ever wear a uniform. You learn to armor your heart, to silence your cries, to march forward even when no one cheers. My first battlefield wasn't Afghanistan or Somalia. It was my family's dining room. I wonder, have you ever been told that your worth is conditional? That love has strings attached. That pride must be earned in currency you don't believe in. If you have, then maybe you understand why betrayal cuts so deep. Because it doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who should have lifted you, the ones whose approval you once craved. I remember one Christmas vividly. Daniel unwrapped a new watch, a gleaming symbol of his future. I unwrapped a book on business strategy, my father's not-so-subtle hint that I should change course. "Read this," he said. "Maybe it'll teach you where real power comes from." I wanted to throw it back at him, but instead I smiled tightly and nodded. That's what you do when your survival depends on silence. And yet, even then, I loved them. Isn't that the cruelest part? That children love their parents even when they're broken by them. That a daughter will spend half her life chasing crumbs of approval she knows she'll never receive. That was me, year after year. So when Harris handed me that folder, when I saw my father's fingerprints all over the forgery of my name, it wasn't just anger that filled me. It was grief. Grief for the little girl who had believed, however foolishly, that one day he would see her. Grief for the soldier who thought service would earn respect. Grief for the woman who realized, too late, that she had always been just a pawn. But grief can be fuel. And as I lay there in the dark, memories slicing through me like glass, I felt something else rising. Not just anger, not just sorrow, resolve. Because if my father had spent my whole life trying to erase me, then my mission was clear. I would write myself back into the story, not as his daughter, not as Daniel's sister, but as Claire Morgan, soldier, survivor, truth-teller. That vow settled into my bones, steady and unshakable. Tomorrow, the fight would begin. By the time dawn filtered through the blinds of that barracks room, I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to run from this. I wasn't going to bury it under silence the way my family always wanted. I had spent my childhood being erased, my service being dismissed, and now my very name had been stolen. Enough. Harris met me in the corridor that morning, a cup of bitter coffee in his hand. "There's someone you need to meet," he said. His tone was clipped, but I saw something flicker in his eyes, a cautious hope. An hour later, I found myself in a cramped office, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Behind the desk sat a woman with sharp eyes and a presence that filled the room even before she spoke. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her suit simple but commanding. She rose as we entered, extending a hand with confidence that was almost disarming. "Claire Morgan," she said. Her voice carried the kind of authority that doesn't need to shout. "I'm Sophia Delgado, former JAG. Colonel Harris tells me you've got a mess that needs cleaning up." Her handshake was firm, unflinching. For the first time in days, I felt something shift in me, a spark of recognition. She wasn't family, she wasn't a superior officer, but she carried herself like someone who had been in the trenches of truth before. I sat across from her, the folder of forged documents between us. "It's more than a mess," I said quietly. "It's my name, my honor, and it leads back to my father." Sophia didn't flinch. "Then we'll follow it, step by step, line by line, and we'll see who bleeds first. Tell me, have you ever met someone and instantly felt that they could see through you? That they weren't interested in small talk or polite masks, only in the marrow of who you are?" That was Sophia. She wasn't here to coddle me. She was here to fight alongside me. We spread the documents out across the desk. Contracts, authorizations, bank transfers, procurement requests, all tangled in a web of deceit. Sophia's eyes scanned the pages with the precision of someone who had spent years dismantling lies in courtrooms. She tapped a line with her pen. "Here," she said. "Notice the initials next to your signature. That's a co-authorization. And look at the time stamp. It's impossible. Whoever did this wasn't just forging your name, they were sloppy enough to leave fingerprints." Harris leaned in. "Fingerprints? Not literal ones," Sophia corrected, though her smile was grim. "Paper fingerprints, inconsistencies, patterns. I've seen this before. People get arrogant. They think no one will question the documents, so they stop covering their tracks." I studied the line she pointed to, my anger sharpening into something useful. "So you're saying if we dig deep enough, we'll find the trail?" Sophia nodded. "Every lie leaves a shadow. We just have to follow it." There was something both terrifying and liberating in her words. Terrifying because the trail led back to my blood. Liberating because, for the first time, I wasn't alone in this fight. Have you ever carried a burden so long that when someone finally helps you lift it, you almost break from the relief? That's how I felt sitting across from Sophia. For years, I had fought alone, for respect, for recognition, for survival. But now, someone had stepped into the arena with me. We spent hours combing through the files. Sophia explained the nuances of defense contracts, the way money moved like smoke through shell corporations. She circled dates, cross-referenced signatures, and showed me how the same routing number appeared again and again in different accounts. "This isn't just fraud," she said. "It's systematic. Someone built an entire machine out of this, and your name is the grease that keeps it running." Her words sank into me. My name, my life's work, the years I had spent earning the trust of my fellow soldiers, the blood I had shed, the losses I had carried, they had twisted it into a tool for greed. Sophia must have seen the rage in my eyes because she leaned forward, her voice steady. "Don't let it consume you, Claire. Anger can burn you hollow. Use it, channel it. We're going to need your focus, not your fury." She was right. On the battlefield, anger got people killed. Precision saved lives. This wasn't so different. "Walk me through it," I said. "Teach me to see what you see." And she did. Patiently, methodically, she laid out the puzzle. Each document became a piece, each inconsistency a clue. By the end of the day, we had mapped a network that stretched farther than I had dared imagine. Contracts flowing through subsidiaries, funds disappearing into offshore accounts, signatures overlapping like ghosts. At the center of it all was Morgan Global Holdings, my father's empire. I sat back, the weight of it pressing down on me. "It's him," I whispered. "It has to be." Sophia's gaze softened just slightly. "We don't have proof yet, but we're close. And when we have it, you'll need to decide how far you're willing to go." How far would I go? That question echoed inside me long after the lights in the office went dark. That night, as I walked back to my quarters, I thought of Daniel. Was he complicit? Or just another piece in my father's chess game? I remembered the look on his face at graduation, the flicker of guilt, the shadow of pity. Did he know even then? "I want to ask you something. If you discovered your sibling might be tied to the very betrayal that's gutting you, what would you do?" Would you confront them head on? Would you give them the benefit of the doubt? Or would you prepare for the possibility that blood loyalty might mean nothing at all? These were the questions that kept me awake as the hours bled into dawn. The next morning, Sophia called me back to the office. She was already standing by the whiteboard, lines and arrows connecting companies, accounts, and names. It looked less like a legal map and more like a battlefield diagram. "I stayed up half the night," she said, "and I think I found something you need to see." She pointed to a transfer small compared to the rest, almost insignificant, but it carried a name I recognized instantly. A subsidiary tied not to my father directly, but to Daniel. My chest tightened. "Daniel, no, he wouldn't." Sophia's expression was unreadable. "We can't jump to conclusions, but the paper trail is there. He's either involved or being used as cover." The room tilted slightly as I gripped the back of the chair. The thought of Daniel, the boy who once snuck me cookies when I cried in my room, the young man who sometimes looked at me with pity but also with something like shame, being tied to this, it was almost too much. But almost isn't enough to stop the truth. "We follow it," I said, my voice steady though my hands trembled. "All of it, no matter where it leads." Sophia nodded, her eyes meeting mine with respect. "That's the only way." By the end of that week, we had built a case strong enough to terrify me. Every page we uncovered was another stone in the wall of lies my father had built, and my brother's name was now etched into the foundation. I stared at the evidence, the weight of it pressing into my bones. This wasn't just about contracts anymore. It was about family, about the blood ties that had strangled me since childhood, about the truth that refused to stay buried. And yet, beneath the fear, I felt something else rising. Purpose. Clarity. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing my father's approval or running from his disdain. I was standing on my own ground with an ally beside me, ready to fight. The truth was coming. And when it broke the surface, it would change everything. When Sophia laid the last file on the table, the room seemed to tilt. The paper trail was undeniable now. Daniel's name wasn't just a passing shadow. It was woven into the network like threads stitched by careful, deliberate hands. Offshore transfers. Emails routed through proxy servers. Authorizations that bore my forged signature alongside his. I sat there in silence, my chest tight, my pulse uneven. Of all the outcomes I had imagined, this one cut deepest. My father's corruption, I could believe. His greed had no bottom. But Daniel. I thought of the boy who once crawled into my room during thunderstorms, clutching his blanket, asking if he could sleep beside me because the thunder made him cry. I thought of the teenager who slipped me a smile across the dinner table when our father was tearing me down. I thought of the young man at graduation, his smile faltering for a heartbeat when our father called me a failed investment. And now here he was, on paper, on record, part of the machine. Sophia's voice pulled me back. "You need to talk to them, all of them, face it head on, before the walls close in." She was right. You can only run from ghosts for so long. Eventually, you turn and face them. That evening, I drove to the Morgan estate. The iron gates swung open, their creak a familiar sound that carried me back through years of memories I didn't want. The house stood as it always had, grand, cold, immaculate. A palace built on ambition. Inside, the air smelled of polish and roses like it always did. My mother sat in the drawing room, a crystal glass in her hand, her posture flawless. Margaret Morgan had always been a portrait of grace, the kind of woman people admired at charity galas. But behind the pearls and perfect smiles was a woman who had spent decades choosing silence. She looked up when I entered, her eyes soft but wary. "Claire," she said, as though my name was a fragile thing. "I didn't expect you. Of course you didn't." My voice was sharper than I intended. I sat across from her, the leather couch cold beneath me. "We need to talk." Her lips pressed together, her eyes darting toward the hallway as though afraid someone might overhear. I know what you're here about. Do you? I asked. Do you know your son's name is on documents tied to fraud and treason? Do you know my signature was forged to make it happen? Her hands trembled slightly, the glass clinking against the saucer. But her words were steady. Claire, please, you don't understand. Your father, he's built something so powerful, so fragile. If it falls apart, it will destroy all of us. And Daniel, he's innocent. He just followed where he was led. Innocent. That word nearly broke me. Mom, I said, leaning forward, my voice shaking with restrained fury. He is not innocent if he signed those documents. He is not innocent if he cashed in on my name. You want to protect him, but who protects me? Who protects the soldiers who fought under my command while my identity was being sold like currency? Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Margaret Morgan never cried. She clasped her hands together as though in prayer. You don't know what it's like, Claire, to be a mother, to see your son's future at stake. I can't let him lose everything. I stood pacing, my fists clenched at my sides. And what about me? What about everything I've lost already? My blood, my years, my honor. Do you care about that? Her silence was answer enough. Have you ever confronted someone you love and realized in that instant that their loyalty will never belong to you? That their love has conditions you will never meet? That was the moment for me, standing in front of my mother, realizing she would always choose Daniel, always choose silence, always choose the path of least resistance. She reached out, her voice trembling. Claire, please, just let it go. Stay quiet. We'll fix this internally. Don't ruin Daniel's life. That was when something inside me snapped. Years of silence, years of swallowing humiliation, years of bleeding for a country while my family dismissed me. It all coalesced into one moment of clarity. I turned to her, my voice low but steady, every word forged in fire. I have already paid with my blood, with my honor, with the lives of men and women who followed me into battles you'll never understand. I don't owe this family anything, not anymore. Her face crumpled, the mask faltering, but I didn't stop. You think protecting Daniel is love, but it's not. It's cowardice. Real love doesn't silence the truth. Real love doesn't sacrifice one child to save another. You want me to stay quiet? No, I won't, not this time. You may not stand with me, but I will stand. Alone if I have to. I left the drawing room before she could answer. The hallways of that house felt colder than any battlefield I had walked. At least in combat, you knew who your enemies were. As I stepped out into the night, the air crisp against my skin, I realized something that chilled me even more than betrayal. My father might have forged my name. My brother might have cashed in on it. But my mother, the one person who could have shielded me, who could have chosen truth, she had chosen silence. Again. And that silence was its own kind of treason. Driving away from the estate, I gripped the wheel tightly, my mind a storm. I thought of Sophia, waiting at the base with her maps and her evidence. I thought of Harris, who had put his faith in me. I thought of the men and women I had commanded, their faces etched into memory. And I asked myself, if your family betrays you, where do you find your anchor? Is it in the blood that binds you? Or is it in the truth that sets you free? I knew my answer. The road stretched ahead, dark and uncertain, but I no longer felt like the lost daughter, the anomaly. I felt like a soldier again on mission, and my mission was clear. The confrontation with my mother didn't break me. It clarified me. It burned away the illusions I had clung to for too long. I wasn't fighting for their approval anymore. I was fighting for something larger, for honor, for truth, for the soldiers who couldn't fight for themselves. And as I drove through the night, headlights carving through the dark, I whispered the words out loud, steady as an oath. I don't owe them anything. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. I used to think the battlefield was a desert at dusk. The smell of sand and oil burning in the air, the sound of rotors overhead. But that morning, as I stood in front of the federal courthouse in Washington, I realized the battlefield could just as easily be made of marble and glass. Instead of rifles, there were pens. Instead of uniforms, there were tailored suits. And instead of bullets, there were words sharpened into weapons. I wore my uniform, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. 12 years of service, 12 years of scars and sacrifice sewn into that fabric. When I buttoned the jacket, I felt the weight of every mission, every name etched into my memory. This was who I was, not Richard Morgan's daughter, not Daniel's sister, but Captain Claire Morgan, United States Air Force, retired but unbroken. As I walked through the metal detectors, people turned. Some whispered, some stared. A soldier in a courthouse, standing against her own blood, it made for headlines. But I didn't flinch. I walked with the same stride I had on deployment, steady, eyes forward. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with tension. My father sat at the defense table, immaculately dressed, his hair perfectly combed, his expression calm as stone. He looked like a man attending a board meeting, not a federal hearing that could dismantle his empire. Daniel sat behind him, pale, his hands clenched in his lap. My mother was beside him, pearls around her neck, her posture impeccable as always. She didn't look at me, not once. When I took my seat at the witness stand, I could feel the weight of every gaze in the room pressing against me. The prosecution's attorney rose, his voice steady as he began. "Captain Morgan, can you state your name and your years of service for the record?" "My name is Claire Morgan," I said, my voice clear, strong. "I served 12 years in the United States Air Force. Multiple deployments, commanded missions overseas, honorably discharged." The words rang out like a drumbeat. "Captain Morgan," the attorney continued, "are these your signatures on the contracts in question?" He slid the documents across the table. I looked down at the pages that had haunted me for weeks. My name, written in ink I hadn't touched. "No," I said firmly. "Those are not mine. And where were you on the dates those contracts were signed?" I raised my chin. "On mission. Somalia, Afghanistan, classified operations. I was not on U.S. soil." The courtroom stirred. Pens scratched across notepads. My father's jaw flexed, but his expression remained cool. The attorney leaned in. "So if those are not your signatures, who would have benefited from them being forged?" My eyes locked on Richard Morgan. For a moment, the room fell silent, the kind of silence that feels like the moment before a storm breaks. "Morgan Global Holdings," I said. "My father's company." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. My father's eyes met mine then, sharp and cold, as though daring me to continue. But I didn't waver. Cross-examination came like incoming fire. The defense attorney pressed me, tried to cast doubt, to paint me as bitter, vengeful, unstable from years of combat. He asked if I had ever resented my father's success, if I had ever envied Daniel. I held my ground. "Resentment doesn't forge signatures," I said. "Resentment doesn't move millions through offshore accounts. Facts do. Evidence does. And that evidence is here. Have you ever stood in a room where the truth felt like the only weapon you had left and you weren't sure if it would be enough? That's what testifying felt like. Each word was a round fired, and I didn't know if it would hit its target. But then came the moment that changed everything. The prosecution presented a series of internal emails traced back to Daniel's account. His name was there, linked directly to approvals and transfers. The evidence didn't just touch him, it engulfed him. Daniel's face drained of color. He looked at the screen, then at my father, his lips parting in shock. "Dad," he whispered, though the microphone caught it, carrying it across the courtroom. "You said it was safe. You said I was just signing authorizations for the interns." The words cut through the silence like a blade. For the first time, my father's mask slipped. Just slightly. His jaw tightened, his eyes flickered with irritation. He didn't look at Daniel, not once. I saw the realization hit my brother, the crushing weight of betrayal. He hadn't been the golden son after all. He had been a pawn just like me. Used, disposable. He sank back in his chair, his hands trembling. My mother reached for him, but he pulled away. Watching Daniel break was like watching a mirror crack. Part of me wanted to reach for him to tell him I understood, but another part of me knew this was necessary. Sometimes the only way to see the truth is for the glass to shatter. When it was my father's turn to speak, his voice was smooth, confident. He painted himself as a victim of overzealous prosecutors, claimed ignorance of the forgeries, dismissed the evidence as circumstantial. He even had the audacity to call me a confused soldier, traumatized by war. But I didn't break. I sat tall in my uniform, every medal, every stripe a silent rebuttal to his lies. And then, during a recess, Daniel approached me in the hallway. His eyes were hollow, his voice raw. "Claire," he said, "is it true? Did he use me too?" I looked at my brother, the boy I had once protected, the man who had stood silently while I was diminished. And yet in that moment I saw not arrogance but devastation. "Yes," I said softly. "He used both of us. We were never his children, Daniel. We were assets." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink away. "What do we do now?" I put a hand on his shoulder, steady. "We tell the truth, no matter what it costs." Back in the courtroom, the final blow landed. The prosecution revealed bank transfers signed under Daniel's name, but linked directly to accounts controlled by Richard Morgan. The trap was complete. The judge's gavel echoed like thunder. The room erupted in whispers, the press scribbling furiously. My father's empire, his legacy, his carefully crafted illusion, it was collapsing in real time. And there I was, standing in uniform, not as his daughter, but as a soldier, bearing witness, refusing silence. When the session ended that day, I stepped outside into the crisp air. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but their voices blurred into static. I stood at the top of the courthouse steps, the weight of the uniform grounding me. I thought of the men and women I had led in combat. I thought of the little girl I once was, clutching her acceptance letter while her father dismissed her dream. I thought of the woman I had become, forged in fire and betrayal but unbroken. And I asked myself, and I'll ask you too, what does honor mean if not this? To stand even when it costs you everything. To speak even when silence would be easier. To fight even when the battlefield looks nothing like the one you trained for. That day, I knew the answer. Honor means never letting them erase you. The day the verdict came, the sky was gray, heavy with clouds that looked ready to break. It felt fitting. Washington has a way of mirroring the weight of its moments, and this one carried the kind of gravity that could bend a family to dust. The gavel fell. The words were read. Richard Morgan, guilty. Fraud, conspiracy, abuse of federal contracts. His empire, once untouchable, was declared compromised, its assets frozen, its reputation shredded in headlines already flooding the airwaves. I sat in that courtroom, my uniform crisp, my hands steady, but inside my chest my heart was thundering. For weeks I had braced myself for this moment, imagined it in countless ways. I thought I would feel triumph, vindication, maybe even joy. Instead, what I felt was hollow. My father didn't flinch when the sentence was read. He sat with the same posture he had at every board meeting, shoulders straight, chin lifted as though this were beneath him. But his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, had dulled. For the first time in my life, he looked small. Daniel sat behind him, pale and broken, his head bowed. My mother sat stiffly, her pearls catching the light, her face expressionless. She didn't reach for my father's hand. She didn't reach for mine either. When the judge dismissed us, the room erupted in murmurs. Reporters rushed toward the exits, phones buzzing, pens scratching. I rose slowly, adjusting my uniform jacket, and stepped outside into the storm of cameras and questions. "Captain Morgan, how does it feel to see your father convicted? Do you consider this justice? Do you have any comment on your brother's involvement?" Their voices blurred into static. I didn't answer. Not yet. That night, I sat alone in my small apartment, the silence pressing in like a tide. The television flickered with news anchors dissecting every detail of the trial. Richard Morgan's face filled the screen, his name paired with words like disgraced and fraud. I turned it off. Do you know what it feels like to win a war and lose your home in the same breath? To stand victorious on the battlefield but realize the people you once loved are no longer standing with you. That's what this victory felt like. Because yes, I had reclaimed my honor. I had dragged the truth into the light. But the cost was my family. Whatever ties had bound us, however frail, were now cut clean through. I thought of Daniel, his eyes hollow when he realized he was just another pawn. I thought of my mother, begging me to stay silent, choosing cowardice over courage. And my father, sitting in his tailored suit, a man who had always measured his worth in wealth and now had none. It should have felt like justice. Instead, it felt like ashes in my mouth. In the weeks that followed, Morgan Global collapsed. Investors fled. Properties were seized. The mansion I had grown up in, with its chandeliers and manicured lawns, went dark. Workers carried furniture out the front door like vultures picking at a carcass. I drove by once, late at night. The iron gates stood open, unguarded, and the windows were black. I sat in my car, staring at the place that had been both prison and palace, and I realized I felt nothing. No grief, no nostalgia, just emptiness. Have you ever returned to a place that once defined you, only to find it stripped of all its power? It's like looking at a ghost of yourself, a life you no longer recognize. That was me staring at that house. I didn't get out of the car, I just drove away. Daniel tried to call me once. His voicemail was short, broken. Claire, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I thought he was protecting me. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I listened to it twice. Then I deleted it. Maybe that was cruel, but I didn't have the strength to carry his guilt alongside my own wounds. Sometimes survival means drawing lines, even against people you once would have died to protect. And my mother, she never called. Not once. So there I was, standing in the ruins of my family's empire, holding a victory that tasted like loss. But here's the thing. War teaches you something most people never want to learn. Sometimes there are no clean victories. Sometimes the cost of truth is blood and silence and broken bonds. And sometimes, even when you win, you walk away carrying scars that will never fade. Still, I knew I had done the only thing I could. Silence would have killed me. Lies would have chained me. Truth, even bitter, was the only path left. One evening, Sophia came to see me. She stood in my doorway, her presence steady, her eyes warm in a way few people's ever were. "You did it," she said simply. I shook my head. "We did it." She stepped inside, sitting across from me at the small kitchen table. "I know it doesn't feel like it now, Claire, but this was a victory. Maybe not the one you dreamed of, but one that matters." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Then why does it feel like I lost everything?" Her gaze softened. "Because you lost what little hope you had left for them. That hurts worse than losing a war. But in time, you'll see you didn't lose yourself, and that's what matters." Her words settled into me like rain on dry ground. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was the kind of victory that doesn't come with parades, but with survival. Tell me, have you ever fought for something, won it, and still felt broken? Have you ever stood on the ashes of a battle you couldn't walk away from clean? That's the kind of victory I held in my hands. It was bitter. It was lonely. But it was mine. And as I looked out the window that night, the city lights glowing like embers against the dark, I whispered a truth I was only just beginning to believe. Sometimes, survival itself is the victory. 6 months later, I stood in a place I never thought I'd be, the Pentagon Auditorium, its walls lined with flags, its air heavy with the weight of history. Rows of uniforms filled the seats, soldiers, officers, generals, men and women who had worn the same burdens I had carried. The announcement echoed across the room. "For gallantry and devotion beyond the call of duty, Captain Claire Morgan." I walked to the podium, the silver star glinting in the light as it was placed in my hands. The metal felt heavier than I expected, not in weight, but in meaning. For 12 years, I had carried the silence of battles unseen, the loneliness of service dismissed by my own family. And now, in this moment, that silence broke. I looked out across the room at the faces watching me. Veterans with tired eyes, young recruits with shoulders squared in pride, officials who clapped politely. And somewhere in the back, Sophia, her steady gaze reminding me that truth had gotten me here. The microphone hummed softly as I leaned in. My voice carried, not loud, but clear. Legacy is a word my family used often, I began. For them, legacy meant power, wealth, a name written in marble, a fortune passed from father to son. But I learned a different truth. I paused, letting the silence settle. Legacy isn't about the name you inherit. It isn't about the empire you're given. It's about what you carve into the world with your own hands, your own blood, your own loyalty. Legacy is not ownership, it's sacrifice, it's truth. And sometimes it's the courage to stand alone when silence would be easier. The room was still. You could have heard a pin drop. I swallowed, my throat tight. For years, I thought I had no legacy, that I was just a shadow in my family's story. But today, standing here, I know the truth. Legacy isn't theirs to give. It's ours to build. I lifted the metal slightly, the light catching its edges. This isn't just mine. It belongs to every soldier who fought beside me, to every brother and sister who didn't make it home, to every quiet act of courage no one will ever read about in a newspaper. This is their legacy, carried in my hands. My voice wavered, but I didn't hide it. So if you've ever been told you are less than your family, less than their expectations, less than their approval, remember this. Your worth is not theirs to decide. Your legacy is yours to write. And no one, not even blood, can erase it. When I stepped back, the applause came like a wave. It filled the auditorium, echoed off the walls, wrapped around me like a sound I had been waiting my entire life to hear. Not the applause of a father who would never give it, but of a family I had chosen. Soldiers, survivors, truth-tellers. That evening, I didn't go to a gala or a press conference. I went to a small bar tucked between two brick buildings, a place where the lights were dim and the jukebox played old country songs. The kind of place veterans gravitated to because it didn't ask for stories, only presence. My old squad was there, Harris, a few others who had made it back. They raised their glasses when I walked in, their smiles tired but real. "Silver Star, huh?" Harris said, clapping me on the shoulder. "About damn time." I laughed softly, sliding into the booth. The metal still hung heavy around my neck, gleaming against the dim light. I unclasped it, setting it on the table beside a worn photograph we always carried with us. A picture of the unit taken in the dust of Afghanistan, our faces younger, harder, unknowing of what lay ahead. The metal lay there beside it, shining against the faded image. The past and present side by side. I lifted my glass. "To them," I said quietly. The others echoed, raising theirs. "To them." And for the first time in months, I felt peace. Not triumph, not hollow victory. Just peace. Later, when I stepped outside, the night air was cool, the city lights glowing against the sky. I looked down at the medal in my hand, then back at the photo I had tucked carefully into my jacket. And I asked myself, and I'll ask you too, what do we leave behind when everything else is stripped away? Is it money? Titles? Approval? No. What we leave behind are the truths we refuse to bury, the courage we choose to live by, the people we stand for when no one else will. That is legacy. And as I walked into the night, I knew mine was only just beginning. When I look back now, 6 months feels like both a lifetime and a blink. I can still hear the echo of the gavel in that courtroom, the applause in the Pentagon Hall, the laughter of old comrades in that dim bar. It's all woven together in me like threads of a story I never thought I'd live. But more than anything, I carry one truth. I walked through betrayal, through silence, through the wreckage of a family that chose power over love, and I came out standing. Not unscarred, but unbroken. For years, I thought my worth was tied to my father's approval, my family's recognition. For years, I believed my service was invisible because they refused to see it. But I was wrong. My worth was never theirs to measure. My service was never theirs to erase. Do you know that moment when you finally stop waiting for someone else to validate you and you start building your life on your own ground? That moment changes everything. That's the moment I found. Richard Morgan's empire is gone. The house, the name, the fortune, it all crumbled under the weight of truth. My brother is left to wrestle with his own choices, my mother with her silence. And me, I am left with my honor. With a medal that glitters not for me alone, but for every soldier whose story was nearly silenced. But beyond medals, beyond courtrooms, beyond broken ties, what I found was something quieter, deeper. A legacy not carved into stone or gilded on a building, but etched into the choices I made when no one was watching. That is the heart of it. Legacy is not the name you inherit. Legacy is the truth you dare to live. I want to ask you, have you ever been told you are not enough? That your worth doesn't measure up to someone else's expectations? Have you carried that weight until it bent your back? If you have, then hear me now. You do not have to live under their shadow. You can stand in your own light. Your story is yours to write. Your legacy is yours to claim. I once thought I was the forgotten daughter, the soldier whose sacrifices vanished in the silence of her family's disapproval. Now I know better. I am more than their silence, more than their betrayal. I am my own name, my own honor, my own legacy. And so are you. When I walked out of that bar 6 months ago, silver star in my pocket, the night air cool on my face, I realized something important. My life was not ending in that story, it was beginning. The cycle of silence had broken. A new cycle had started, not defined by my father's ambition, not chained by my family's expectations, not silenced by their disdain, but defined by truth, by courage, by the choice to keep walking even when the ground shook beneath me. That's the cycle I carry forward. And maybe, just maybe, it's one you can carry too. If you've been with me through this journey, thank you. Thank you for listening, for standing in the silence with me, for hearing the story I once thought would never be told. Stories like these matter, not because they are mine alone, but because they echo in all of us. In every soldier dismissed by their own blood. In every person underestimated, overlooked, silenced. And maybe in you. So here is the truth I want to leave you with. Claire Morgan reclaimed her honor. But more than that, she proved something larger. That legacy is not the name etched on your mailbox, not the wealth passed through generations, not the applause of those who only cheer when you wear the right uniform. Legacy is forged in the shadows when no one is looking, when the choice to stand or fall is yours alone. That is where honor is born. And if you've ever been overlooked, dismissed, or betrayed, let this story remind you. You are not defined by their silence. You are defined by your courage. If this story touched you, if you saw yourself in even a piece of it, I hope you'll stay with us. Leave a like, subscribe, and share this video. Every week we bring you stories like these, stories of honor, resilience, truth, and the quiet courage it takes to keep walking when the world tries to write you off. Because these stories aren't just entertainment. They are reminders that none of us are alone. That dignity can be reclaimed. That legacy can be rewritten. So let's walk this new cycle together. And remember, your legacy is yours to write.